Good evening, mi gente. This is Ray Collazo, the host and founder of the Found Translation Talk Show, the talk show that stacks truth about politics and today's hottest issues. And there's not much more. I mean, it is, wow, so many emotions we had to have. And I really appreciate our audience watching, especially on the East Coast. It's a little late in the evening, past some of our great friends' bedtime, but they're straining their eyeballs because we had to have an outlet to have this conversation about the first presidential debate, probably one of the most watershed moments in our history, even though it felt more like a bad series on Hulu than historical political moment. To have this conversation, who better than from coast to coast, great leaders? First of all, let's welcome journalist and our real go-to in the great state of Arizona, the Grand Canyon State. James Garcia is in the house. James, welcome to Found Translation.
How are you? Thanks for having me on the show. Thanks so much.
Doing good. Not as clean as you are. I mean, you are just coiffed there. And we're going to hear the perspective of not only a journalist, but somebody in the Southwest that is in a state that could be the tipping point for this election. And the next guest is someone that's one of our great emerging national leaders, city council person, a county council person in Prince George County out in Maryland, and a great friend to the show, Deni Taveras. Deni, welcome finally.
Hi, Ray. Good to see you.
I know I need to bow, kneel, send what are those fruit things? Edible arrangement thing, because Deni, the county councilwoman, is clearly the most overdue guest on Found Translation. Deni is a great friend from our youth, and also, honestly, just a rising star in the Democratic Party and Maryland politics. And we wanted to get your perspective, Deni, and of course, our great executive producer in the background, James Garcia. You know, put a little bug in my ear and said, you know, we have to have that Dominicana perspective because we need someone that can help us as she passes along her beverage of choice. So if I could just, I'm just going to kick off this conversation. I know people have a lot of comments, and our producer will engage you in this conversation. Keep the comments coming. We'll try to address them. And I want to get not only to take sort of their general observations of this debate, where we go from here, and also the Latino perspective. And as our great friend Frederick Velez III said on social media this evening, was the word Latino mentioned during this debate? We'll get into that in a second. But if I can first give sort of my opening statement, the biggest thing I get out of this debate is I get from you all. Not just James, Deni, Albert, my siblings.
Hold on.
On Facebook. You know, just the people that I'm observing their reactions on social media. The biggest reaction I got was, I'm turning this off. I'm going to Netflix. This is unbecoming of our country. This is a clown show. This is a joke. All those iterations. And what I want to share with people is you had a right to feel that. And I even responded. I forget who it was. A friend of mine on Facebook that said, this is where our country's going. This is what this is. And I responded and said, you know what? Is it where our country's going? Or is this where this one person is? You know, we have to do everything we can to push back on him. And so my message to people before I get to Deni and James's commentary is, this is exactly what he wants. He wants you to go to bed, like take a shower before you go to bed tonight because it felt so yucky. He wants you to be disillusioned. He wants you to be fearful that this democracy is going to be taken away from us. And so what I want to share with y'all is we cannot let him have what he wants. And we'll get into Biden, who obviously is in a distinct position having to debate this character. But at the end of the day, Joe Biden's not calling any other political figure in this country a clown, a loser, and all the other things that he did. But, you know, when it's almost like being in an abusive relationship. At some point, you got to lash back. Let's start with you, County Councilwoman Deni Taveras, with your opening thoughts.
Well, to me, it was just so shocking that he didn't want to own anything. He didn't want to own the 200,000 lives or 250,000 lives that have passed. And that recognizing that the 15% increase or more in crime rates happened under his watch. The fact that he basically didn't want to acknowledge the 10 million jobs that are still out there where people are still going hungry, not being able to pay their rent or buy food. And so to me, it's the absence of the conversation on Latino issues. I mean, that's even let's not even touch it because that's like the third rail, right? I mean, for me, but And when I think about the fact that he didn't want to really own the response, or rather the lack of response on COVID with regards to the schools, where all school departments had to fend for themselves literally across the country, to me, it was just shocking. And so that to me, I mean, when you have somebody like Biden having to defend his personal problems within his family with his son, I think I've never seen such a low blow in politics from somebody so dirty. And the fact is that I just finished acknowledging the fact that this man is probably in debt $421 million, and he's making money while he's in the White House. And maybe this is also maybe why he's willing to do whatever, and I do mean whatever it takes, to steal this election. So I'll leave it there.
That's right. And you're listening to County Councilwoman Deni Taveras. Deni, why don't we stay with you for a second? Because, he's talking a lot about this quote unquote economy, interrupting a lot, but he's boasting. And so I want you to give us a real life perspective on really what's happening in this country, because one of the things I admire about you, Deni, is that, and I follow what you're doing very closely, is that, you see your county is very much a microcosm of our country. The economic divide, the haves and the have-nots, the immigrant story, this fight for affordable healthcare, affordable education. And so what's this, as a local elected official that cares about everybody, including economic prosperity for our small, mid-sized businesses as well, share with us what has been your truth over the last 8 months during the COVID-19 crisis.
Oh my God! Don't even get me started. Okay, let me just start.
That's the point. It's found translation.
Let me just start on what happened today. So when we are talking about the fact that this administration did not allow individuals that were undocumented to not receive Medicaid, and so we weren't able to expand a lot of the programs that provide assistance to the uninsured and underinsured through this mechanism, is particularly that affects a lot of undocumented families. So that's an issue which, again, given the rise of COVID-19, literally my district, exactly this zip code where I'm sitting right now, has the highest number of cases of COVID-19 in the entire state of Maryland, DC, and the state of Virginia. And we're talking about over 600,000 cases per 100,000 people. So just that alone. Then let's talk about the delivery of tests inside this county, and the need for resources inside this county. My community, which is over 50% overwhelmingly foreign born, and with that, this area is particularly the neighborhood that is next door is about 80% foreign born, but most of them are Central American. This population, the peak of the COVID-19 cases rose in April. We didn't even get testing until the end of June. Okay. We were able, I'll say this, we were able, starting around May, to be able to provide food to my community. And then this ended once the high gear of the election cycle started. And as of last week, we just heard the announcement of how food will be distributed throughout the country through the USDA program, Farmers to Markets. And as a result of that, most of the food is being sent to red states. So you'll see Arizona, Ohio, Iowa, Michigan, those are the states. And out of the meals that we requested, over 90,000 boxes that were allowed in my district, the highest district that I'm saying that is affected in a 3-state region, I'm only getting 2,400 boxes in a population for 100,000 people.
Unbelievable.
That just gives us in just making and adding just to the commentary that he said that governors were applauding his work. It's because they feared that if they didn't say positive things, they were also going to be put on the crapping list of not receiving the resources, literally the resources that they needed in order to make sure that their constituency survived the COVID-19 crisis.
And he didn't even, and they didn't even acknowledge that one of the things that has kept the country above water was the stimulus package, which was largely driven by the Democrats in the House. So, and now when they have an opportunity to do something again in the fall, and the Democrats passed another package, and we could debate, again, they said they were willing to negotiate, but the reality is they passed it in May, and it's October, and there's no sign of more support for our community. And that disproportionate distribution is not only highly political, but has a definite racial tinge to it. Our great friend, big part of the show, Christina Vega, I don't think he controlled his feelings. It was like talking to an abuser. He just wanted to bash or disregard Biden. Of course, he lashed back and called him a clown. A lot of those psychologies in the mix, no question about it. James, you're a scribe. You're a man of words, and you're a man of tone, that understands tone. So just some analysis of, just the bully nature of his commentary.
It's difficult to provide any kind of serious analysis when a man like Trump is part of the conversation, right? Part of this thing that is supposed to be at least a quasi dignified event, a presidential debate, a debate between the leading representatives of the major political parties about the future of the United States of America. That's a serious thing. And here we had Trump, frankly, just being Trump, right? Nothing new. There was nothing at all new. Every word literally that came out of his mouth, I have heard repeatedly at either press briefings or, just at White House lawn, impromptu press conferences, occasional snippets from rallies, you name it. It's on a loop, right? This guy is on a loop. And I think I hope that part of what happened tonight was that those people who did stick around and watch at least as long as they could stand it, were able to discern that there was practically no questions that Chris Wallace asked that he responded to directly, right? He didn't answer the questions on the table, even the most serious questions. How do you keep the American people alive, basically, in the middle of this COVID crisis? For Vice President Biden's part, I think, honestly, he was remarkably restrained. And I think that occasionally you could just see in his eyes that he wished he could, walk 4 or 5 steps over to this man and sock him right on the damn jaw.
Especially when he didn't respond to Bo, like he disrespected Bo at the end there. That was
But he generally restrained himself, and I think in the end, there's going to be pundits who are going to, come on at some point over the next 24 hours and say, Mr. Biden should have been tougher, or he should have, whatever. And I think that he exhibited an extraordinary amount of restraint, given that he was Joe Biden too, right? I mean, this is a guy who will mouth off and tell you what he thinks, and be very blunt, and occasionally he let himself go there. But I think he maintained his composure, and he tried to essentially deliver the message that he came to deliver to the American people. And I think for the most part, if people stuck around long enough, they'll see that. They'll see that the man was trying to be what he is, a presidential candidate in the middle of the worst pandemic in 100 years, in the middle of a recession, et cetera, et cetera. We know the circumstances. And I think that in the end, he did about all he could do, because Trump is nuts. He's a lunatic, right? And we know that. He plays by his own rules in his own head. There was no prep, right, by this guy, by Trump. Everything he said, like I said, was just on a loop. It's stuff that he has said before. Now, you mentioned something earlier about, just really quickly, you mentioned something earlier about the word Latino not being mentioned in the entire thing. Let me just read you, if you can, bear with me, a paragraph of something that I wrote that should appear in the Nation sometime in the next couple of weeks. As of this writing, this is what was not said tonight. As of this writing, more than 200,000 people in the United States have died of COVID-19, including more than 42,000 Latinos, who are dying at a rate of about 1.5 times the rate of whites, according to the COVID Tracking Project. Things are even worse for Black people, who are dying at 2.4 times the rate of whites. Latinos and Blacks are being hospitalized at 4.5 times as often as whites, and both communities have been crushed by the pandemic economically. Asked at a White House press conference in April as the death toll began to mount, what did this president say? He called it terrible. That's terrible. And we're doing everything in our power to challenge it. And then he rambled on about how the unemployment rate for Blacks and Latinos, has been the lowest in history. Instead of finding a better way to protect Latinos during the pandemic, this president has pushed to keep low wage earning jobs, pushed to keep those low wage earners, I should say, at work, such as people at in agricultural jobs or restaurants or in the hotel industry, and all of the essential jobs that our working class Latinos and African Americans are doing. Right? That's what he's doing. Right? That's what he's doing. That's what we all know he's doing. That's what our communities know he's doing. We're not being duped. Nobody's being duped, right? And that's what we didn't hear tonight. And I wish that somehow the thing had been structured. In fact, it would have been nice if Mr. Wallace had said something like 90,000 out of the 200,000 people who are dead are people of color, and they do not make up 45% of the U.S. population, right? They make up just over 30% of the population.
That's right.
It would have been nice if that question had come up, but it didn't come
virtually
up,
every child,
literally
virtually every small child that's died of COVID is was a child of color. So, when people say, oh, you want to go out to school, get your kids out to school, we have to have a different approach to this than maybe other people in other communities. And you're listening to James Garcia and Deni Taveras break down this first presidential debate. Wow, to think there's two more of these. Lots of commentary in the chat, but I do want to talk about Vice President Biden for a second, because I think there's a couple of pieces here, Deni, I want you to tease out, because on some level, having a debate with this guy is kind of a fool's errand to begin with. I mean, nobody looks good coming, in this environment around this character. But at the same time, I did walk away feeling like there are a few opportunities where he could have showed he was going to champion for us in a way that I think he moderated his approach as it relates to some of the policing issues, and even with some of the economic issues where he really could have, even with that COVID conversation, really could have stuck his flag and say, I'm going to be a champion for people that are not being treated unequally, especially, which obviously includes the African American Latino community. So, Deni, I mean, do our folks walk away excited? They're horrified by the alternative, but we need them to be really jazzed up about coming out for this election.
And I have to agree with that. I have to agree. I think that there is a little bit of that missing oomph, that energy that si se puede, that hope that existed, the audacity of hope, magic that existed when Obama was running, right? And so it took us a little bit to get into the groove with Biden. And I think his win started post South Carolina. But I do think that with that, we gotta get the energy up. We gotta get it going. And I do think that I saw the magic when he was talking about his environmental plan.
Yeah, that's true.
As a chemist, I say that as a person who worked for the Environmental Protection Agency, and And I think that when you saw that magic of him getting it together in terms of his weatherization programs, his renewable energy program, how excited he was of shifting from fracking to renewable energy plan and the possibility of providing prevailing wage jobs to individuals, to me, that sounded so exciting. And it was so full of possibility. I do think that you're right. I think that there were too many. I think he was too shy of the bombs that existed when discussing the policing issue. Because I do want to acknowledge that when Trump said, "Oh, remember that guy that got shot in Kenosha?" Can we remember that it was outside white supremacists and militia that came in from outside that crossed state lines? That and all looters that were identified in this really calm and chill city were individuals that almost literally came from outside the state. So we have to recognize that a lot of the people that were creating this looting and creating this negative image were people that were not from there.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think that that could have been a more powerful comeback to put this man in his place. That because of his rhetoric, it's creating this continued division. The fine people on both sides talk that we also see. And so I think that with regards to COVID, I do think that the mentioning of the fact that 1 in every 500 African American people will be affected by COVID, I think to me that was a powerful statistic. That had he droned that into a little bit more, I think again would have been a little bit more powerful. But I think he kept good eye contact when he was saying, look at your table, look at the people who are missing at your table.
Yeah, he fluctuated between being a counterpuncher. I think some of his opening statements, I was surprised they weren't more buttoned up. I think toward the end, I agree with you, Deni, particularly with the environmental protection issues and some of those other standing up for his sons. I think he kind of got him into focus. But I'll say this, and I think for the next two, Biden has to make sure that he's hitting some of these touchstone issues, and there's going to be other subject matters. But, Trump, I know he's full of it with it, but he brings up insulin prices. That's something that Latinos deal with. Now, we know he's lying, and we know he's making it up, and it's a lot of pro wrestling stuff. Farmer pretends they're mad at him and all that. But the reality is he brings it up, right? The policing issue, let's keep it real. The people that get impacted the most by crime are our communities in the inner city. So, if it's fake and it's bravado, but some of that stuff resonates with our folks. So there has to be a balance between our civil rights and our people that understand, so that works with some of our community. And so, Biden has to make sure he gets to some of those touchstone issues, whether it's Puerto Rico, whether it's immigration, whether it's insulin, other healthcare disparities. The Medicaid gap in some of our states, for example. I know you've done a lot of work in that, Deni, in Maryland. So, these are the core issues that our folks want to see. You got those ganas for. James, just a thought about from an Arizona perspective. You have a very distinct political culture there, increasingly purplish. Statewide office with Senator Sinema in 2018. Polls looking very strong, but Biden's support in the Latino community isn't overwhelming yet. And from afar, it seems like neither the enthusiasm. So what do you think Latino Arizonans take away from tonight?
Well, I think Latinos in Arizona and probably across the country, if they sat and watched, what we saw tonight, would notice what we noticed, right? That here's a man in Vice President Biden who seems like an extremely decent human being. Okay, he seems like a very decent human being. When he says that I want to represent the entire country, I think he really means that. Right? I don't doubt that. When he calls out President Trump for his insensitivity with regards to mounting horrific number of deaths, he's saying that it's not rhetoric for him. He means it. All of those things. But tonight was just one more example of where I think he misses the nuance, right? He in many ways is still living in a world where the demography of this country is, in his mind, looks like it did maybe 25 or 30 years ago, right? Just generally. He hasn't absorbed what has evolved over the past, especially the past couple of decades, right? You know, we're in a time in which the single largest minority group in the country now, of course, is Latino, as we all know, those of us on the show, and probably most people watching. But if you had come from another planet and watched this debate tonight, you wouldn't know that, right? There'd be you'd have no clue, right? You also wouldn't know that Asian Americans are,
that's right,
being beaten in the streets, by white supremacists.
And by the way, a more progressive, at this point in our nation's history, a more progressive voting bloc than Latinos are. Keep it real.
Yeah, probably so. Yeah, and so
they're educated. They understand
the nuance. Right?
I mean, I'll be honest with them. That's a lot of it, frankly.
Yeah. So I think that what I saw again tonight was someone who doesn't have a grasp, unfortunately, of that demographic nuance that has reshaped and is reshaping this country. And for whatever reason, whoever was prepping him, hasn't been feeding them with that, or somehow it's just not absorbed. Now, the problem is here, of course, is that we're asking ourselves, what are the options here? A good, decent human being who in some way is still somewhat clueless about the full demographic shift of this country, or a complete madman who wants to overthrow the government, is an absolute unequivocal racist, and for that matter, has no gumption at all about sidestepping the question of 200,000 human beings in the United States of America being dead because of him, largely because of him.
Well,
right?
sidestepping
I think it's fair,
the torture of immigrants on the border, sidestepping the people that died unnecessarily in Puerto Rico. So there's a lot of sidestepping. Deni, I can imagine. Yeah.
So
Deni,
that's the choice on the table, and I'm not suggesting, when people suggest, oh, there's no choice here, I think that's just stupidity. Of course, there's a choice here. There's a choice that I've just outlined, right? Again, a decent, thoughtful human being who has the qualifications.
And by the way,
States,
Trump
and may very well usher in an African American woman president, right?
Yeah.
Versus this other guy, right? So there is a choice.
Yeah. Trump did have a little bit of a point because from a platform perspective, Biden has moved left. If you look at his policy platforms, and Deni, and I was thinking about you and thinking about, let's keep it real. Thinking about all the Latinos I know that probably would have done a better job debating Trump tonight than Biden did. Not that Biden's bad, but I just think about all the talent in this country, particularly with our rising Latina leaders. And
I think AOC would have put him in his place.
Yeah, the chancleta definitely would have been coming off. But I want you to speak to those women, Deni, because on one level, we know, and our black voters and black women voters sort of made this call very strategically at the end of the day in a very competitive field. And we know the pros and cons of, Biden's candidacy. But at the same time, I think James laid out the case where we're at here. So, Deni, I want you to speak to those women out there that are watching and think of what you're thinking. Like, well, we couldn't have done better than this. But at the same time, if this man is in office again for 4 more years, it can get much, much worse. Deni, speak to those women out there and the emotions and how should they be thinking about the next 30 plus days?
Well, to me, I mean, I'll be frank. I mean, to me, white women put us in this place. Let's just keep it real.
And enough Latinos. I'm just being,
and enough people that
if Latinos voted in African American numbers, we wouldn't have had this problem. So,
exactly.
Be honest about it.
Exactly. We have a lot on the line with Roe. I mean, people don't want to talk about the third rail, which is Roe v. Wade, but we do. I think that if he is able to push and shove down our throats, the appointment of this stolen, in my opinion, Supreme Court seat because we've already lost the opportunity with Garland. I think that it will be, elections do have consequences, and this is something that will have a repercussion for us for the next 40 plus years. And so I do think that we have to make a strong decision that has to be definitive. I do not think that we can afford the luxury of being wishy-washy, of being ambivalent in this particular election, because Trump has clearly said that he will not accept the results.
That's right.
And so because of that, in order for him to know that he is not the person that we need and want and require in this country, the voting must be resoundingly against him. That's right. In order to ensure that he doesn't have space and argument to debate it in front of the Supreme Court. And I don't know if you saw last Sunday, John Oliver speak to Trump's administration's strategy with regards to the Supreme Court, but they're trying to figure out ways to extend the election as long as possible.
Absolutely.
So elected officials get to decide in swing states and be able to come before the Supreme Court if he's able to stack it to his favor.
He said it. I mean, he's not hiding the strategy. That's why I said, if people think he's going to wait till after the election day, they're nuts. Because he said the strategy is, it's like his business thing. Sue, delay. Don't pay your taxes. Don't keep suing, keep appealing, keep throwing money at it. And, and I'll just duck and weave. So I don't know, Albie, if you want to jump in this conversation. Our producer, Albert Garcia, is very passionate. He's in Florida, very critical swing state. So I'll be just your reflections.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's amazing, about this is that, on the heels, like Deni was saying about, Supreme Court Justice, Ginsburg, Ginsburg death. And look, I mean, today I was just hearing conversations about people really preparing to go back 30, 40 years to when abortion was illegal and people talking about hangers and people talking about things like that. I mean, that was a time, that was a dark time, right? And people talking about, bring America back, but that's not the America we're trying to bring back, y'all, And so I think that's the scary thing about what's going on today. And look, I'll say what's amazing. I was listening to part of the debate, with your goddaughter, Ray, and she was perplexed, right? This is an 11-year-old talking about how is this guy? I can't, she's like, are you not supposed to be interrupting people? Why is the moderator having to correct the president of the United States, right? She's like, I don't even do that in my class, right? How the hell can we do that, right? And so it's crazy, and yet these folks don't care about that, right? They will, it's about power for them, right? And I think that's in some ways what is, people have to be quick on the draw about this, and that it is a power game to them, right? If they can delay this until they can get to the odds in their favor, then they'll do that, right? And so what we saw on display here tonight was just, again, some, two obviously distinct different, folks with different philosophies, but beyond that, you just someone literally who was trying to just ram his answers down America's throat, right? And that's just, that's horrible to see.
Yeah, when the Fox News moderator is telling you, yo, you got to chill out, something's up. But he was named after he has that Biggie Smalls, same name anyway. But James,
can I
a reporter, a lot of you hip hop heads didn't put that together. Anyway, but James, as a journalist, we've got an amazing couple weeks. We're going to have October 5th is not only the voter registration deadline for most of the country. A few states have a little more time, but also the census deadline, which I know, Deni, that keeps you up at night too, my friend. And we have to do everything we can to get people across that finish line. Early vote. James and I'll be collaborating on some activities when early vote begins in Arizona a week from Thursday. And, it's election season. It's not election day. We'll have a vice presidential debate sandwiched in between the next presidential. The next presidential will be in Miami. And we'll do a post-debate show for that on the 15th. So, James, what as a journalist, what are you going to be looking at in terms of trends, in terms of your coverage that's going to be important for voters to pay attention to?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of things I think that before I kind of go to that, I just want to mention, I think there's a couple of things that almost no matter what we do, we have to sort of acknowledge that they're going to happen. And one of those is that, sadly, this president will almost certainly put another justice on the Supreme Court. And sadly and horrifically, that Supreme Court justice may be part of a decision that will overturn Roe v. Wade or weaken it so tremendously that it's going to set off a kind of domino effect. Sadly, also and horrifically, we have a president who is going to do everything humanly possible to stay in office, if for no other reason, because he's afraid he's going to go to jail. Right? He's looking down the road, and he sees all sorts of prosecutors kind of waiting in the wings, hoping that he doesn't get reelected, so that they can literally put charges on him. Right? And so, I think that where we are as a community, where we are as a country, is that we have to acknowledge that never before possibility yet, that it's on the table, that the possibility that there is a man in the White House who will just do everything he can to say, I'm not leaving, is part of the world that we live in now. Now, I have just enough faith to believe that on January the 20th, if he hasn't left, somebody's going to go and grab his arm and lead him out the door, and that Vice President Biden will become president of the United States. And in all likelihood, we will have more Democrats running the House, and that in very, very likely that we will flip the Senate. And so we will be in a position at least to begin to repair the damage. But let's also understand that that damage is going to take a decade or two to fix. The damage that this man has done, not just to the institutions that are part of our federal government, but to our view about what government means and what a democracy is and what the press stands for, and on and on and on. All of these institutions that we have come to trust, the damage that he's done is just incredible. It can be repaired, but it's incredible.
And on the flip side, what could be done in 4 more years?
Finally, we as Latinos and African Americans and people of color in general will be in a position to be at the forefront of the repairing of the democracy that we have all come to believe in. We understand it's flawed, terribly flawed. Things weren't great before this guy showed up, right? White supremacist groups were acquiring new members in droves because they hated that a black man was elected president. That was the world that we were living in before this guy showed up. But we can be part of this solution to repair the destruction that this guy has reaped. And I'm confident that opportunity is going to come. And we will somehow get through the horrifying effects of having a 6-3 majority of conservatives, and particularly these kinds of conservatives on the Supreme Court. Somehow we'll survive that, and this country will survive that. But it's going to take us assuming a role that we've never had to assume before in some ways, which is really to be at kind of the vanguard of saving our democracy. It's really that simple.
And as the black women activist that called Biden out on the carpet for reminding him that you're here because of the black vote in the primaries, particularly black women vote, and that, we expect a black woman to be the vice president, who, by the way, was as qualified as anybody else. So a strong choice. I want to go to you, Deni, because this is probably the most important month of our lives from a political perspective. It's really going to be such a big turning point one way or another for our country. And, for the next generation, I think about the little kids now, like the little Latino kids that increasingly are the majority of their school districts, the majority of their classrooms, and they should be in a country that's preparing them to take the mantle of leadership in our country. And this nonsense is happening, and this danger of an apartheid type state is on the table for them. So, Deni, just a message to our family out there that, is feeling a lot of emotions, is heated, maybe disillusioned after tonight. let them know what they need to do and how they have to focus during this critical time in our history.
Well, I want to be able to just do a little bit of revision in terms of where we came from to where we are now. I mean, we know that when Barack Obama was in office, there was a shakeup in the psyche of this country because the power paradigm was shifting, or people sensed that there was a shift that was called post-racial. And therefore, a loss of white privilege was and created a white fragility that led to the creation of the Tea Party movement and whatnot. And hence, that was the division that Trump alluded to. But now that's even shifted to white supremacy and straight out white supremacy and militia groups. And that's what we need to get back from. We need to return back to some sense of normalcy where we can now, sorry, my dog, hold on here you go.
It's okay.
We need to talk about a sense of normal. Lucky, please, Papa. A sense of normalcy.
He's excited about what you're saying.
Yeah. Where we can restore the international reputation and recreate reestablish our linkage in foreign affairs, reintegrate with the Paris Accord and our environmental positions. But just even looking at our needs domestically, at the end of the day, we have to care about what happens to healthcare. We have 100 million people literally with pre-existing conditions. I mean, we are in need of ensuring that we have health care for people that goes up to 26 years old. That, I mean, when the Affordable Care Act came into play, the people that were uninsured went down. I know that we've seen that here in this county. And so I just want to reiterate that those were real results that we saw. And I think that for whatever we saw in other states where they try to dismantle it, the fact that when it was working well in areas that cared for it, we made sure that it worked well. And so I think that we have to be able to speak to that. At the end, I do think that people need to vote safely, vote by mail, make sure, especially if there are people with comorbidities. But in order, at the end of the day, for us, because I'm not going to lie, that I'm deathly afraid of our numbers when it comes, and when I speak to healthcare and just the access to abortion, to me, that's really real, because I do see that when we speak to that, given the issue of the Supreme Court, Black and Latino households and young ladies are the ones that are going to be most affected when it comes to these issues, because wealthy families will go to other countries where abortion is permissible.
That's right.
We will not be able to afford it here.
That's right.
Especially our communities of color. So with that, I just say that in order for us to get the Supreme Court that we need, where everything is on the table, we will need a Democratic House and we will need a Democratic Senate in order to make it happen. And like I said, if they're going to do this, we've got to put everything out on the table. So it has to go both ways. So with that, I urge everybody to make a plan to vote, and I'll see you at the voting box.
No question about it. No question about it. I want to thank Councilwoman Deni Taveras. And I'm teasing myself, but it's very long overdue. We admire your leadership. You're part of the family, Deni. You know that with me and LB and our great friends. I want to shout out quickly two other Latinas that are taking on the mantle that we went to school with, two great friends that are running for office, one in a few weeks and one next year. And James Garcia is running for school board in her town in New Jersey, in Palisades Park. I want to shout her out. And Alexa Aviles is running for city council in Brooklyn next year, Deni. So we got to make sure. Alexa Aviles.
Oh yeah, she did so well.
Yeah, she's running for city council next year, but she's raising money. She's doing really well. So yeah,
I know. She did really well in her fundraising. I'm so excited.
Oh no, she's doing great. So she's part of a pioneer in our network of friends. And Deni, I got some big plans for you, but we'll talk about it offline. I got something in the works for you. James, thank you so much again for your leadership.
Thank you.
As a journalist, and there's a few people. It's not all fake news, my friends. And definitely follow James Vanguardia. Let people know about Vanguardia Arizona very quickly.
Vanguardia America is a national newsletter that I publish every week. You can sign up for free. Just find us on Google, vanguardiaamerica.com. And then I do some work also occasionally for Latino Rebels. They publish my newsletter, and I got a piece coming out in the Nation. So I get out there, and I'm trying to give voice to our community as much as I can. That's what I spend my time
and also
doing.
Great playwright, Deni.
Important.
Great playwright.
And sometimes I write plays.
Very talented guy.
Yeah.
And the last thing I want to say, and again, thank our great friends here in Albert, of course. Can't do it without our executive producer and our friends that were watching and commenting. But the last thing I want to say is, folks, I want you to imagine something. I want you to imagine 5-6 months from now, when this democracy holds like it's supposed to, we come out in unprecedented numbers, and we get past this fever. It's not going to be over. We'll still have COVID. We'll still have an economic crisis we're climbing out of. We'll still have a lot of attacks in our community. But a better world is around the corner. And I want people to understand that, God, it's such a dark time. But I want you to see that light, because in 5-6 months, this could be so different. And that's what we need to really keep that in front and center of our hearts and minds. Because look, I miss my friends physically. We don't get to see. I mean, there's so many things that I miss about, during this era. And, and again, my concerns for the future for these young people. So the light is there. Thank you, Deni. Thank you, James. Thank you, Albert. Thank you. Translation Familia. And be diligent. As we said in the comments, make a plan to vote. Good night.